So what is a polycast? Now, this is an OmniContent episode, which turns out to be a blog, video, and polycast, so you get all of them at once. And we'll go into that a little bit later. But if you're listening in right now, then thanks for being meta with me and listening while we're talking about it. So when you think of an audio content type, what do you think of? Music, the Clubhouse, Twitter Spaces kind of thing, where it's live, panels, or binaural beats, or podcasts. And for me, it's music and podcasts just because those are obviously the most prevalent audio forms out there. We listen to music and we might listen to podcasts while we work out or something. And so before iPod popularized the term podcast through their iPod line, basically, is one of those things where it could be called anything. It was streamcast, audiocast. I actually interviewed someone on the PolyCast. He was my fourth guest. He was talking about how before the iPod did this, they were calling it like streamcast, and he had his own streamcast at that point. I think actually it might have been even a company too. And the thing is, like, I think those terms are way cooler than podcast, like having a streamcast, so you're streaming it to people, or an audio cast, so you actually get the word audio in there and makes it very clear, very right away. Now, the same idea came about when I was coming up with the polycast idea. It wasn't just because I didn't like the word podcast. I mean, that was a big part of it, but it wasn't just that, because I had this show in mind where I had all these different kind of series, I had all these different topics, all these different guests planned. Like, I didn't have a specific type of guest besides the fact that they were multidisciplinary, and that could mean a lot. Someone who's multidisciplinary could be like a computer science guy who also knows economics, right? But then the other person, I have someone that came on that was a quantum physicist and a ballerina. Like, their worlds don't really overlap as much. Maybe computer science a little bit, but not really. And so, despite the fact they're both multidisciplinary and that's what bridges them together, their worlds don't overlay with each other. So the term polycast was meant to describe an audio show for PolyInnovator. Basically, any kind of content that PolyInnovator makes that's audio only, that's a polycast. And it's standing for many series, topics, and guests. And having this kind of poly for much and many, the terms polis and poly. And so the multiple kind of bridges it can make out, that was what I came up with. And I think that having a polycast versus like a podcast allowed for people to get the idea in their mind when they're seeing it, like, hey, this show is different. This show has many topics. I shouldn't necessarily expect just one. And that way, when people come in to listen to the show on Spotify or whatever, they kind of have the right idea. And I think the only other podcast out there is like some Polytechnic school, and they have like a handful of episodes in comparison. So Polycast is pretty unique as well. Now, when I'm doing these OmniContent sprints, basically I write out the blog post, which I'm kind of using as notes now. I'm looking at the camera, but I'm also talking into the mic. And so we have 3 different mediums there. And I tried to, back in the day, I was making these slideshows as well for like a visual representation. And so I would try to audio describe those slideshows, how when people are listening in, they could understand what I'm looking at. And even right now, I'm using my hand gestures to really explain the topic. And so you can't pick that up in audio, but you'll be able to listen to this while you're on the bus or something like that. So why is the polycast the way that it is? It's because of the way that it is. TikTok audio gets stuck in my head every time I say that. But considering there's so many different topics that I wanted to start out with, the first 2 episodes of the podcast were actually around self-education. And this is because I was trying to create like the OmniContent and just this whole modular agree first phase. But I realized that I really wanted to have a little bit more history. Like, I had been making multiple podcast episodes with the United Living Construct before this, and I had a whole bunch of it was around 15 micro polycasts as well on Anchor. And I didn't like how they were all separated. Like, right now, I'm actually thinking about doing some separate newsletters, but I'm still trying to keep it all on the main Ghost website. I want everything I make to be funneled onto here, even if it's also posted elsewhere, like on Substack. But back then, it was only on Anchor, or only on podcast.co, or only on SoundCloud. And I didn't like how it was so isolated. And then, all of a sudden, quarantine happened, and this is like right after I moved. I think 2019, at the end of 2019 is when I moved to podcast.co, right at the beginning of 2020. And then like May 2020, April, May 2020 is when everyone started really going into lockdown. Everyone was stuck at home. Interviews became a thing. And I had this in my head. I was like, I don't want to show somebody my show and only have a couple episodes in there. That's not going to look good to them, despite the fact I've been making podcasts for quite some time, at least a few years by that point. And so I decided, screw it. Like, I'm gonna forego what everyone else thinks, because I think everyone else is saying, oh, you should just keep it one topic, keep it niche down, niche down, niche down. And my gut was screaming at me to be like, hey, combine them all together, call it a day, and then you can move on from there. So that way you have all these episodes in one place. And so, like, if you look at the first season, it's just a mashup. I have the regular PolyCast 2 episodes, the first two. Then I have 15 micro PolyCasts, and then I have however many, probably like, 15 more of the ULC podcast. And so I ended up totaling out about 42 episodes. I think I made one more at the end to like top cap it off or something like that. But so I had 42 episodes. Like, that's a good number to end on for first season. Because I had no idea like how many episodes per season I wanted at that point. And then like the next episode is like the first interview. And it just really worked out really well. And so I didn't actually have that many like OmniContent the second season. I barely had any micro podcasts, I think, too. But when the third season came around, I started really adapting and trying to get my schedule into this idea. So like I didn't even write this down in the post, but in my head, the schedule was like, okay, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, you do, let's say, the Fireside micro podcast. I don't like being forced to make those, because those are really only there in case I have an idea I want to share. So being forced to make them would be kind of rough, but then I also have a crap ton of ideas in my list that I could go off of. And then on Tuesdays, it'd be an interview, and Thursdays, it'd be an OmniContent, and maybe interview both days if I had a lot or something like that. And so, like, it's one of those things where I had, like, a nice schedule in mind. Never got around to doing that schedule, though. So the next thing came about is, like, how do I make these shows? Now, I used to make the micro polycast just by pulling up my phone and recording it. And I only was able to do that with Anchor because they had their app. And actually last night, of all times, I tried using the Riverside.fm app, and it broke on me like within 10 seconds. And then I went back in, it was fine. But when I went into the website, it didn't work. I've been championing Riverside.fm, but I'm honestly thinking maybe I need to move the Descript or something like that at this point. And so it's one of those things where, okay, I was really excited that maybe like this app will allow me to record on my phone for once, because using the recording apps on like Google Play just don't really work, especially since I want to be able to access it on my computer so I can edit it. And so this like whole using the phone to record thing ended up stopping. But so I just mainly use Audacity now when I have an idea. So instead of doing this video, I would just pull up Audacity and same kind of thing. But the other things would be like the OmniContent. I already explained that I write a blog post, I take the headlines and some of the ideas, and I make a video like I'm doing right now. And so the OmniContent's pretty nice. It's around 15, 30 minutes or so, and it's a nice length to where people can just kind of come in, listen, check out the idea, and dip out. And then I just cut the audio and put it into a podcast. And I might add different like flourishes, like an intro or an outro or something like that. But for the most part, it's a pretty simple editing process. The interviews is where it gets a little bit more interesting. I was actually very obsessive about cutting out any ums or uhs, any long pauses, and so I'd spent a lot of time editing. And I realized it's not really that big of a deal. There's so many shows that people love that they actually don't even cut out any of that crap. I think it was Gary Vee. Like, I saw an episode with him, and like just the quality. I was like, dude, like edit this a little bit, please. Cut out some of the junk stuff. And it is more along the lines of like some other big creators, because at least V has like a lot of people on his team. But there's like some really amazing shows out there that I'm just like, why aren't you cutting this out? This is kind of stupid. And so it's just one of those things where I wanted the quality of my show to be higher and set an example. Even if I'm kind of small, don't have a huge listening base right now, eventually I will, ideally. And I want to be able to set an example from the beginning, like, hey, quality was intentional from the beginning. And so that was kind of the mindset behind that. And nowadays, I don't necessarily over-edit that much when it comes to that, but I do cut out any ums or uhs. I do cut out anything that the guest asked me to cut out, which only happened maybe twice. I've never really cut anybody's voices without thinking, it was like, okay, this is not, I don't want to be censoring anybody. It's kind of like my anti-censorship kind of mentality. So beyond that, like, I don't really over-edit the interviews that much either. I try to do some color correcting sometimes, but it's just one of those things where it's not my skill. And yeah, beyond that, like, I don't really do that many like regular PolyCast episodes, which are about like 30 minutes. I've done like maybe 3 of them at this point. So there's not that many, but there's a couple more series coming out that I want to talk about real quick. I'm so excited because they're so cool. I want to be able to have my guests back. I've actually talked to a few guests since their time on the show, and their lives have changed so much, and it's so fascinating, like all the new stuff that's happening to them. And I realized that most interview shows don't really have guests back on. Like, sure, like Lewis Howes or Gary Vee, some of these bigger names in the podcasting space, they'll have guests return. Like Tony Robbins went on the Lewis Howes show like 3 times, and they'll reference that. But it's so many years apart that like they don't really get the kind of feeling of like, hey, here's the update, here's what's new. And they just kind of move on to a different topic kind of thing. And I think that's good. Like, you should move on to a different topic. But it's really interesting the fact that like there could be a new way of approaching that. And that's what this whole round 2 ding ding kind of like a boxing ring kind of episode that I'm thinking about doing, where I literally have someone come on for like 30 minutes and just update the audience like, hey, this is where I'm at now. Like, there's some really interesting things that happened to some of the interviewees on the PolyCast recent years, and I really want to share that with people. And so I think that'd be a great way to do that. And then the next one is the triple threat PolyCast, where I have 2 or 3 guests, I think 2, just because logistics kind of thing. We have 2 or 3 guests plus me, and we're all talking about certain topics and kind of have a pseudo-Socratic kind of discussion and like try to interleave our knowledge areas. I think it's really interesting considering the whole PolyCast concept and polymathy. That would be a really interesting way of kind of going about that. And like people can see that interleaving of knowledge firsthand. And so beyond that, it's really like one of the things where I wanted to have some kind of audio arm of the PolyCast, an audio arm of the PolyInnovator ecosystem. And I think that the PolyCast really fits that well. Whether it's a solo cast or an interview, they all kind of funnel into this channel of the audio medium. And some people might be overwhelmed by that. Some people might be like, hey, you should probably like tone it down. Don't share so many like random series. And I'm like, no, this is what the show is about. You either like it or you don't, and I get that. But I think a lot of people are going to like it way more than they might initially think. Other than that, like, I don't want to keep this video going too long or the PolyCast too long, but I encourage you to listen to a PolyCast today. Now, if you're listening to this one, that doesn't count. I need you to go check out another micro episode or something like that. But if you're listening in, I appreciate you. If you're watching, go check out a PolyCast. And if you're reading, well, you won't be hearing this if you're reading. But if you're reading, check out one of the episodes. I have plenty of links in the blog description. If you're on the app like Spotify or on YouTube, there should be a link to the blog post in the description. You can go check it out that way too. Makes it way easier to, like, I always try to make it as convenient as possible for people to click a link and just get to where they want to get, because I hate having to find someone's profile, go to their website, go to their blog post, and then find it that way. Make it easy for you. All right. Other than that, thank you and bye.